Let it go. All right. Good evening, everyone. My name is Jeannie Tapia-Messa, and I'm a parent on the Focus Committee. Thank you for taking the time to join us this evening. Focus is a committee in the Unionville-Chadds Ford School District organized by parents in collaboration with the UCF District Administration. Focus provides information and education to parents and the community through seminars, workshops, webinars, and electronic resources. Our mission is to promote well-being for families and healthy choices for youth in our community. Before we begin, we'd like to acknowledge that Focus could not do the good work that we do without the tireless support of our district leadership. In particular, this evening came together with strong support from Krista Fazio, Director of Communications, and Justin Webb, Director of Technology. We'd also like to thank our Focus Committee Administrative Representative, John Sandville, Superintendent of Unionville-Chadds Ford School District, and Leah Ryder, Director of Pupil Services. A huge thank you to our UCF school PTOs for their collaboration and spreading the word about this event. We thank you. Justin, if you could advance the slide, please. Thank you. A quick review of Zoom webinar logistics. We'll be recording this presentation so it can be viewed after tonight for those currently participating and others who couldn't actively attend. The recording will be made available on the Focus website in about a week or so. After the presentation portion of the event or the evening, we'll be conducting a moderated question and answer period in partnership with our own Bree Ziegler, school social worker at Unionville High School. Please submit your questions at any point using the Q&A feature on the Zoom webinar. All questions will be moderated and asked by our Focus team during and at the end of the presentation. If you have confidential questions about your child that are not appropriate for this evening's chat, please reach out directly to your behavioral health representative at your school via email or phone after the event. We'll do our best to get to every question while respecting everyone's time tonight. And about tonight's event, a parent and family guide to childhood trauma. We are joined by an expert in childhood trauma and treatment, Ms. Beth Tyson. Beth is a childhood trauma consultant, former trauma therapist, 3-time best-selling author, and an advocate for children in foster and kinship care. She founded the Beth Tyson Trauma Consulting firm that provides trauma-responsive training and guidance to organizations that believe in supporting the mental health of children and families. Above all, Beth is a survivor, a helper, and a mom of the spirited little girl who keeps a secret stash of chocolate in her room, just like her mama. So without further ado, it is our pleasure to present Ms. Beth Tyson. Thank you so much, Beth, for joining us tonight. I'll let you take it away.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for that beautiful introduction. I am honored to be here with all of you, and we have lots of information to talk about tonight. So I hope that you can put whatever else is on your mind, to the side for now, so you can really focus on the well-being of yourself and your children as you hear about childhood trauma and how we can help families heal. I am, like Jeannie said, a childhood trauma consultant. I'm a former trauma therapist within the child welfare system. I was an in-home crisis therapist for families who were about to have a child removed from their home due to behavior issues and other mental health challenges. It was my role to try and keep that family together through coaching, parent coaching, through therapy with the child, and helping them heal from the trauma and loss that they had experienced. I found that what was most effective in that role was the parent coaching, helping the parents understand childhood trauma, giving them some skills and tools to parent from a trauma lens, and guiding and coaching them along the way to keep them encouraged and motivated that there was hope and that things could get better and that things could change. So that's what I'm here to do with all of you tonight, is to give you some hope, some education, and some skills that you can take with you back to your family to apply right away if you recognize any of the symptoms of trauma in yourself or the children that you love. So I will share my screen now and start the presentation on my side. Please let me know if you can't see it for any reason. Okay. And if at any time, like, my audio stops, or if there's any trouble seeing or hearing me, I forgot to mention to Jeannie or as somebody else, if you could text me so that I know and we can kind of troubleshoot, but I'm hoping that won't happen tonight. Can everyone see my screen okay?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So we'll be talking about childhood trauma, like I said, and it can be a bit of a heavy topic. So if you need to take a break or step away at any time to take a couple of deep breaths or just to settle your mind, please feel free to do that. There's, lots of coping skills that you can use for yourself after this session if you're feeling triggered or upset about anything you hear tonight. It is a heavy topic, but the good news is I have a lot of hope to share with you tonight as well, and things that you can actually do right away to start to help your children feel better. So again, just a little bit more about me. I am a CASA volunteer, which is a court-appointed special advocate for 2 children in the foster care system. So I advocate for them in front of the judge about what is in their best interest and what is best for their mental and emotional well-being. And I also published a children's book for kinship families. Kinship families are children who are being raised by their grandparents or other relatives. And I worked with a lot of kinship families when I was doing my role as a therapist, and I just couldn't ever find a children's book to bring to them. So I decided one day I was going to write my own. So based off of real life stories and people that I worked with, I created the book called A Grand Family for Sullivan. So if you know any grandparents who are raising grandchildren or other relatives who are raising, minor relatives, please take a look at A Grand Family for Sullivan. It's been really helpful to a lot of people in that population. So tonight we'll be talking about what childhood trauma is. We'll be talking, after that portion, we'll talk about understanding the trauma behaviors and the trauma responses. And then in part 3, we'll go into how to cope and find hope for the children that you love and care for. We'll also have that moderated question and answer at the end. Along the way, I'd love for you to pop questions into the chat if you're able to, or into the question and answer section, and we will have somebody from the team relay those questions to me and I can answer them right then and there. That way, if you forget about a question along the way, you don't have to wait all the way until the end. So hopefully that'll work smoothly, and feel free to chat or add comments, or if something's resonating with you, feel free to pop that right in. So it's important to know that approximately 50% of children experience at least one traumatic event before the age of 18. And, that's an alarming amount. And that's just, the numbers that we're aware of. We know that it's probably happening at much higher rates than that because we just don't have the data or the information to back it up. But approximately 50% of children will experience at least one traumatic event. You might recognize yourself as a trauma survivor. Many generations in the past did not really address trauma. It's relatively a new concept and topic, and people are just now starting to understand how our childhood experiences really impact our nervous system, the brain, and our body. And so you may notice some trauma responses in yourself as I describe what they are. You may notice that you've been through some of the experiences that I label as traumatic. Please know that trauma is subjective. So just because you went through one of these events does not mean that you necessarily have, PTSD or even symptoms of trauma. Trauma is subjective to everybody. So one person might go through the exact same experience and be traumatized. Another person might go through that experience and not be traumatized. It has to do with your temperament, your support system, your family dynamics, and all sorts of things that go into, whether or not you are able to handle, these overwhelming situations that happen. So there's nobody that can decide for you, yes, you have been traumatized, or no, you have not been traumatized. It's subjective. The person decides. If you have the feelings and the symptoms and you felt overwhelmed and out of control, then and you see that as traumatizing, then you're the one who decides if it's trauma or not. After this presentation, please take a break to either call a friend or maybe write in your journal about the things you learned tonight, and try and process some of the information if this is new to you, just so that it can, be able to sort of integrate into your mind and body in a more balanced way. Because again, this can be some surprising information if you haven't heard it before. And just take really good care of yourself and drink lots of water. So let's see. So what is childhood trauma? There's different types of trauma, and tonight we're focusing on childhood trauma, and it's also called developmental trauma. And it's defined as a distressing emotional response to tragic events in childhood that interrupts healthy attachment to caregivers and impairs brain and body functioning. And what's important to know is that trauma responses are involuntary. So when we start to see behaviors, exaggerated or very intense behaviors from children, it's often that they have experienced trauma and we either aren't aware of it or we don't know how to recognize it. And so these big feelings and emotions will start to come out, and those responses can be interpreted as intentional by adults who don't understand trauma, but trauma responses are always involuntary. And so that's why we need to put on what I like to say is your trauma lens, which is something you'll have after tonight. When you look at children's behavior, from now on, you'll be able to see what's happening in front of you through your trauma lens and ask yourself, could this be a trauma response? Could this child be triggered by something in their environment? Could this have something to do with what's happened in the past and not what's happening right now in my classroom or in my home, or in the community? So some things that trauma creates are changes in our brain functioning. So it rewires or sets the brain up in a way, in early childhood to function differently than brains who are not experiencing trauma. It also breaks down trust and safety, and trust and safety are crucial for our mental and emotional well-being. If we don't feel safe and secure in our environments, it's very difficult to do those higher level functioning things like learn in the classroom, complete assignments, follow directions, control our emotions. All these big functioning things that we need to do, these high level functioning items, are not accessible because of our feelings of lack of safety and trust. These feelings of unsafety put our brain into a hypervigilant state that is constantly looking for threats and is constantly in that defense mechanism or that defense mode, trying to protect itself. And essentially the part of the brain that's good at making decisions and analyzing information and making logical choices is not functioning the way it should be. And the survival brain is like on fire, is turned up on high. And when you're in survival mode, you're focused on protecting yourself. And so a lot of the behaviors and the big emotions that we see are attempts by the child to protect themselves because they feel unsafe and threatened in some way. That makes it very difficult for them to learn and follow directions and behave the way that they need to behave in home and at school. It also creates a need for control. So if your whole world has been turned upside down and there's lots of chaos going on, and maybe you've experienced abuse or neglect, you're going to feel an instinctual need to control the things around you. And so those big behaviors that we're seeing, or even the withdrawing behavior that we sometimes see, is out of a need to control the environment and control their emotions so that they can function and survive. We also, like I said, see these emotional and behavioral symptoms, and the trauma also creates unconscious triggers that we don't really understand or in the moment that they're happening. So for the child themselves, they may not be aware that they have been triggered by something in their environment. And the people around them typically don't understand that the child has been triggered by something in their environment. And a trigger is just external and internal sensory input that comes into a child's mental frame that makes them feel afraid or reminds them of a past trauma or some overwhelming situation. It could be a sight, a sound, a touch, a sight, sound, touch. What am I forgetting? Sight, sound, touch. The five senses. Anyhow, I can't remember the other two right now, but we'll go over that more in a little bit. And it creates attachment difficulties. So if you've learned from an early age, or even at any point really in your childhood, that adults cannot be trusted because they might abandon you, reject you, harm you in some way, then that creates a difficulty attaching to other people and bonding and forming those close, healthy relationships. You'll see people that have experienced trauma will often push people away with their behavior in order to keep a distance between themselves and other people so that they can't be hurt again. Adverse childhood experiences was studied by Kaiser Permanente in the 90s, they did a study on adverse childhood experiences. It was a longitudinal study that looked at over 30,000 people to see how their early childhood experiences affected them in the long term. So they found people that had certain categories of adversity, and they looked at them over time into adulthood to see what the outcomes of their life was. And what they found was that there were poor outcomes in health and social functioning. So not only did it affect their mental health, but it also affected their physical health. So they saw higher rates of diabetes, substance use. They saw higher rates of heart disease and autoimmune disorders. So it really becomes critical that we understand how the experiences in early childhood set up the brain and body so that we can prevent and heal the trauma that has happened to children. So the categories that were studied in the ACEs study are abuse, neglect, and household dysfunction. Now, these do not encapsulate all of the trauma or all the types of trauma that could occur. This is just what was studied in this I think it was a 1997 or 1998 research project where they looked at abuse, so physical, emotional, and sexual abuse in children, neglect, physical and emotional, mental illness in the home, incarcerated relatives, a mother who's treated violently, so witnessing abuse, substance abuse in the home, or divorce. And these are the categories they studied to see how children who experience these things, how would they do long term? And unfortunately, the outcomes were not very good. Some examples of trauma from baby to teen years, to go a little bit more in depth to things that were not listed on that previous screen. So there could be in utero exposure to substances, extended or unexpected stays in the NICU after birth, a parent with mental health problems or addiction, separation from caregivers for any reason. It could be medical reasons. It could be due to the child being removed from the parent because of substance use or other mental health problems, physical, sexual, or emotional abuse, neglect, so not having your basic needs met for attention, for food, for shelter, witnessing abuse, which I mentioned a moment ago, and illness or medical trauma of the child or the parent, divorce, and the sudden death of a loved one. Again, this is not comprehensive. These are just some things to point out in addition to what you saw on the previous screen so that you can get an idea, a fuller picture of what might be traumatizing to a child. School age trauma would be, being bullied, any natural disasters that take place. For example, Fort Myers right now is really suffering from a lot of trauma from the hurricane that just happened there last week or 2 weeks ago. Accidents, car accidents, or other disasters that happen either at school or at home, violence in the community, so school shootings, even finding out about school shootings is traumatic for some children, racism that is taking place, foster care or adoption is also considered a traumatic experience for children. Teen trauma would again be bullying, some of that community violence, intimate partner violence comes into play here, usually around the teen years, where a teen may be abused by a romantic partner. Being aware of terrorism and school shootings, the death of a parent or sibling, or the incarceration of a family member. So again, it's just examples of what trauma can look like across the childhood years. The ACEs study, the results found that it created these events in childhood created an increased risk for mental illness, substance misuse, unemployment, diseases, like I mentioned earlier, early death through suicide or accidents or otherwise, and poor social outcomes. So you can see why this is an important topic and why we need to help people understand trauma so that we can prevent it. And for those who we can't prevent it for, so that we can begin the healing process in our homes, communities, and schools. So part 2, we'll talk about understanding. Well, before I go into part 2, does anyone have any questions about what I shared or comments? Okay.
There's one question. Sorry, there's one question here. What do I do if after listening to the presentation, I realize I have suffered from childhood traumas myself? How do I know if I've healed or how to begin to heal?
Sure. So if you recognize yourself in tonight's presentation, it's important to, talk to a medical professional, a licensed mental health professional, seek therapy. If you can't do that right away for some reason, you can't get access, it's important to talk to a trusted loved one, somebody who's safe that you trust. And if you can't do that or don't have access to that, then the next best thing you can do is journal and write about your situation and kind of help your brain begin to process it. If you're ever in crisis or need immediate support, there's a new national hotline that's available 24/7 for people who are in mental health crisis, and that's 988. And you can text or call that number 24 hours, 7 days a week, and they will guide you towards support and help immediately. You can also go to your nearest emergency room or call 911 if you didn't feel that you could do any of the other options. So yeah, so that, those are once you realize that you have experienced trauma and that it is affecting your life, it's really best to try and get yourself into therapy to try and work through it. There's different types of therapy for trauma. The most effective that I've seen are EMDR therapy. So that's something you can write down and look up. It's E, M as in Mary, D as in dog, R as in Roger. And you can look up what that is after this, or I can also send some resources to be shared after this event. And then there's also trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy is very effective for children and adults with trauma. There's many others, but those are the two that I recommend.
It's great, Beth. Thank you. I think that's it for now.
Okay, thank you. So here is a diagram of how trauma impacts our brains. So you may remember from a mental health class or psychology class from college or even high school about the different parts of our brain and how they're all connected to each other, but how each piece has a different function, a different purpose. So the prefrontal cortex of the brain is in the front of your head here, up by your forehead, and it is the decision maker. It's the executor of your brain. It thinks logically, it analyzes situations. It also controls and manages our emotions. And it really is sort of like the supervisor of your brain. It's very organized and able to make decisions quickly for you. However, when our brain is stressed, the prefrontal cortex becomes disconnected from the rest of the brain. And the survival brain, or the amygdala, starts to light up and turn on and connect more strongly with the rest of the brain. And the amygdala is the fear center of the brain. And it's where we are experiencing a weaker control of emotions and thoughts and actions because we are stressed. And so therefore, all we can really do with that survival brain, that early brain, is survive. It wants to protect and survive. And all the other things in our world kind of go dim and don't matter anymore. The only thing that matters is our safety and our security. And when we are feeling very insecure and scared or threatened, we tend to misjudge others' behaviors. We tend to misjudge situations that we're in, and we're not making clear decisions because the prefrontal cortex, the part that is in charge of doing that, is turned off. It's not functioning the way that it should. And so that's why you see children have a lot of big behaviors and difficulty controlling their emotions and difficulty listening and follow directions, forgetting things, and being unable to function in the classroom and at home in a healthy way, because that part of the brain that is responsible for doing all that is turned off because they are feeling stressed and overstressed and very overwhelmed and threatened, and they're in a fear. In the fear center of their brain. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you. It's great.
So some trauma responses, and again, these are involuntary. These are not conscious decisions that people make. And that's where things get tricky, because we tend to punish children when we see these behaviors. And Unfortunately, these trauma responses are not voluntary. They're not something a child ever decides to do, or an adult for that matter. These are involuntary responses because the body and the brain has been overwhelmed and they feel extremely threatened and afraid. And when we're in that state, again, it's not a voluntary choice to go into that state. It's something your brain does in order to protect you, in order to keep you alive. And so we can't punish children when we see these behaviors because it's really not their fault, right? They're not choosing to do these things. So what you'll see is the diagram here shows some of the common responses that are involuntary that you'll see. So they may be experiencing intrusive thoughts or intrusive memories. So scary memories or scary thoughts about something in the past or something in the present that is disturbing them, that kind of takes them out of the present moment and puts them into a very scared position and a scared place in their mind and in their body. And again, when you're feeling scared, your ability to function in the world becomes impaired. You might see startle responses. So like people who gasp a lot for like the littlest thing. I'm actually one of those. The littlest noise or the littlest thing that surprises me out of the ordinary, I go like that. And so that's a typical trauma response that people have, because it's like your brain is just automatically responding to the environment in a very startled way because of trauma that has taken place in the past. You might have someone who feels very shameful about what's happened to them, especially if there was abuse. So you'll see low self-esteem and self-hatred. You might see suicidal thoughts or behavior. Panic attacks, which are, your body reliving the trauma and kind of going into a state of either fight, flight, or freeze. And that is when you become completely overwhelmed by fear to the point that you start to have physical reactions. So increased heart rate and sweating and shaking, and you feel like you're going to die, or you might feel like you're going crazy. And all of these feelings are very common and very normal for people, not normal, but natural for a person to go through after they've experienced trauma. You might see chronic headaches or pain, stomach aches, especially in children and younger children. They can't verbalize or express the same way that we can as adults, our emotions. And so their body will play them out. So constant complaints of body aches or stomach aches or headaches or other types of somatic complaints, which means like bodily complaints, that can also be a trauma response and a symptom to look out for. Children with eating disorders, substance use. Substance use is often misinterpreted as, somebody who's just irresponsible and made bad choices and got addicted and they just have no self-control. And that's actually not true. The reason people are using so many substances right now, one of the reasons we have an opioid epidemic is because of trauma. When you can't manage your emotions and you feel constantly overwhelmed all the time, these medications and these drugs help you feel good. They make all those scary feelings go away. They make the intrusive memories and thoughts go away. They make all the uncomfortable panic attacks go away. And so that's why you see people using substances as a way to cope with their emotions, because they don't know what else to do. They don't know how to cope. They don't have the skills. They haven't been taught. They may not have access to therapy, or they may feel too afraid to access therapy or feel that they'll be stigmatized for doing so. And so they turn to illegal substances or even legal substances to numb themselves from the pain, the emotional pain they're experiencing. So that's something I really am passionate about spreading awareness about, because it's not their fault. You might find a child that has little or no memories of their early childhood years. That's a common symptom, because we can at times, forget or block out really disturbing experiences as a way to protect ourselves. Hypervigilance is very common. So, this is a child who pays attention to everything, notices everything. Oh, mom, why was the light on? It's not normally on. Or why are we going this way? We don't normally go that way. Or, where are we going? What are we doing? Very just needing to know all the things all the time. That can be a trauma response, because they're trying to get all the information to make sure that they're safe. And if any little thing is out of the ordinary, it sets them off and makes them nervous, because they think, uh-oh, something's going to happen. So that's hypervigilance. That can also look like paranoia, where you're like paranoid that something's going to happen to you, or that somebody's out to get you, or that somebody's going to do something to you. You often see that also in hypervigilance. Dissociation is something that is common as well, where children will or adults will, their brain will kind of take them out of the present moment and into a safer place by just numbing out or not being present and not really being here in the moment with people. And so you'll note dissociation is taking place when a child may lose tracks of large chunks of time and not know where they were, what happened. That's a common way to know that the child may be dissociating. So if, if a child, say you went through a bunch of things that a child was supposed to do in a day and they didn't do any of them, and you kept reminding them and they didn't do it, and you're getting angry and angrier because you're like, I told you so many times to do this. They might quite literally not even be hearing you because they're dissociated at the time when you're instructing them to do it. So, that's another area where kids get punished for their lack of behavior, but it could quite possibly be that they really are dissociated. And so they're not present and they're not even hearing it. It's like not going into their brain. Depression is a common symptom, irritability, flying off the handle easily, being angered by small things, a loss of interest in everyday activities, numbing out again with like screens, shopping, sex, video games, the internet, social media, all of those. Relationships is another way to kind of numb and like distract yourself from your emotional pain. So those are some other common behaviors you'll see. Difficulty sleeping is, of course, very common, and nightmares, night terrors for children. Decreased ability to concentrate on schoolwork and other things, because if you're worried about your survival, if you're worried about when you're going to see your mom again or your dad again, if you're worried about when your next meal is coming, if you're worried about whether your uncle's going to abuse you at the next family party, you're not likely to be able to concentrate on anything else but that, because you are so focused on avoiding that situation that you can't concentrate on homework, schoolwork, listening, following directions, and all those things. And so triggers, I talked a little bit about earlier, triggers play a big role here because triggers are reminders. They set off the brain, tips off the brain to danger, tips off the brain to, something might happen. Something bad might be happening, because this reminds me of a previous situation when something bad did happen. And so therefore, your brain goes into an automatic response when a trigger comes along of the fight, flight, freeze, or fawn responses of trauma. And, fight, flight, freeze, and fawn are the 4 typical responses that we talk about. There may be others, and some people argue that there are, but those are the 4 main ones. Fighting is obviously a child who looks aggressive. Someone who's flighting is a child who's running away, a child who's eloping, a child who tries to run out of the room, a child who tries to hide under the bed, hide under the desk. That's the flight response, a trauma response. The freeze response is that dissociation, that numbing, that withdrawal. Kids who won't speak to you, won't talk to you, go in the room, shut the door, and stare at their phone all night. That's the freezing, that's the numbing, that's the dissociation. And then fawning is a tricky one, because it can look like the child is doing really well. They are super compliant, follow all the rules, get straight A's, or do well in school, have lots of friends. They're very, very compliant, and they're doing everything they are told to do. And so they look like they're fine, that they didn't have any trauma responses or any difficulty with whatever it is I experienced. The problem is they're so scared to death to do anything, to rock the boat, to push back, to fight, to speak up, to share the ugliness or the fear or the sadness inside of them, that instead they just put up this, I'm perfect, I'm great, I'm going to follow along with all the things you tell me to do, because if I don't, I'm scared that you may abandon me, reject me, hurt me, harm me, kill me, whatever it might be. When a child,
Yep. Sorry. I thought you were done with that slide. I'll wait till you're done with the slide.
No. Go ahead. This is a good time.
Okay, great. So there were 2 questions related to what you just covered. Let's see the first one. Here's the first question. Are triggers indicators of unresolved trauma in children or adults?
Yes. So, yes. So if you are finding that something is setting off a child, if you can pinpoint what the triggers are, and we're going to go through an exercise that helps you look at, helps you try and identify these subconscious triggers for children or yourself. You'll see, like, okay, for example, I'm trying to think of one of my triggers. I get triggered, by certain smells that remind me of my mom. My mom died suddenly in her sleep one night. And so if I'm walking through a store and like I smell somebody with her perfume on, I might have a strong emotional reaction. I might start crying. I might suddenly become really irritable at my husband, or I might not be able to focus for the rest of the night on my work or whatever it might be. Like that's kind of those triggers that remind you of some past negative experience, or some sadness or some trauma that has happened to you. So if you are finding that you or a child or whatever big emotions, or the opposite of the big emotions, whatever makes you want to numb and dissociate and check out, those are indicators that you have unresolved trauma. So you want to try and pinpoint, what is it that got me either super angry, very sad, flying off the handle, these things that seem over exaggerated for the act that happened. Like say, say your husband forgets your birthday and you're so angry, you lose it. You're screaming at him, how could you forget my birthday? You're the most terrible person in the world. And it might have been an innocent thing. Maybe he had a lot going on that day. He had remembered it, but forgot to pick up the card and blah, blah, blah. It might have been an innocent thing, but you're flying off the handle because, you cannot believe that this person could not remember your birthday. It's so selfish, so inconsiderate and all this stuff. You have this big visceral reaction. That's an indicator that maybe there was a time in your life where you were forgotten about, abandoned, rejected in some way. And so your husband's like innocent, forgetting of your birthday or some other special event is interpreted as this huge, harm or hurt to you instead of what it actually is. So those are the things that really get big reactions, or things that make you want to numb and shut off.
Okay.
Are things to look for. Yeah.
Okay, great. Is there time for one more question before the next slide, or should we save it for later?
Let's see, 7:40. We have till 8:30, right? Yeah, I think so. I'll try to make it quick.
Yep, this one is also related. How do I know what these involuntary trauma responses in my kids are related to?
Well, it's kind of a detective situation. We have to try and figure out what it could be. That's through conversation, maybe it's through therapy, maybe it's through looking back at, did my child experience any traumas? Are we a divorced family? Are we, has there been any abuse in their past? Was the pandemic traumatic? There's lots of different things. Does my child know about school shootings? All these things can potentially be traumatic for a child. So if you're seeing any of those responses, it's important to recognize them as, symptoms of trauma,
Okay,
and try and get them help for that. So here we'll talk more about our brain and our body and how we are affected. And this is just a visual. It looks more complicated than it is, but it talks about arousal. And arousal is just a scientific word for like how stimulated you are throughout the day. Where are you on a scale of 0 to 10 in terms of how stimulated are you? How stressed are you? And what this shows here is that when we are under stressed or like bored or kind of checked out, uninterested, we have a low level of arousal, and we also have a low level of performance. So we're bored, we're kind of like can't be bothered with anything. We're not that aroused, and we're not performing very well. Like we're just not getting anything done. As the day goes on, maybe you have your cup of coffee, take a shower, you're feeling good, you're feeling more ready. You're driving to work, you have an exciting meeting coming up, or some other good news, or something that's just propelling you through the day. then you might be at an optimal state of arousal where you're feeling ready to take on the world, and you have like a moderate amount of arousal and strong performance. So you're having that higher level of arousal, you're engaged in your environment and the things that are happening during the day, and you're also able to perform very well at that level. As you become more aroused or stimulated or stressed, this ability to perform drops off exponentially. And that's what you see on the right-hand side. So once you are over-aroused, overstimulated, or stressed, you begin to fall into this red zone, the stress zone, and that's where the fight, flight, and freeze responses take place. And children and adults with trauma typically live in this red zone. And what we want to do is try to get them and ourselves back into the green zone. And there's things that we can do to help us get there. So once we recognize and we can kind of ask ourselves this, like, where am I on this? I call it mindset mountain sometimes, but where am I on this mountain? Am I at the bottom on the left-hand side where I'm checked out? Am I at the top where I'm feeling really strong and feeling ready to take things on? Am I in the red and I feel overwhelmed and I can't function right now? Anyone who's in the red isn't going to be performing very well. As you can see, the performance is very low and the arousal is very high. So what we want is to not try to teach when people are in the red, not try to lecture, not try to educate when people are in the red, because they can't take it in. They aren't able to take in any information, any logical, analytical information into their brain, because as I showed you earlier on that brain diagram, the prefrontal cortex isn't functioning very well when you're in the red. So this is just a reminder to ask yourself, and also to look at your child and say, where's my child on this graph right now? Are they able to take in what I'm saying? Are they able to learn their lesson right now? Or do I need to help them get calmer and less aroused so that they can hear me, so that they can integrate the information into their brain and their body that I'm trying to share with them? Any questions about that?
No, I don't think so right now, Beth.
Okay. Emotional regulation kind of goes along with this. And this is a word that is really popular right now, at least in the world of psychology and parenting. And it's all about, how do we regulate our nervous system, and how do we teach children to regulate their nervous system? And regulation just means like manage, how do we manage our emotions? And it's regulated, our emotions are regulated by our nervous system. And there's the myth that we're supposed to be calm all the time, especially in our culture here in America, where, you're just supposed to be fine. Yeah. How are you? Fine. How are things going? Good. It's like, you're just supposed to be calm and happy all the time is the general perception that is placed on all of us. However, that's not natural. It's not natural to be calm all the time. We're not built that way. Our nervous systems aren't built that way. So we put this unrealistic expectation on ourselves and our children to just be like happy and calm all the time, like we're a news anchor or something. And it's just not realistic. It's not how our body or our nervous system works. So our body and our nervous system works like the bottom row here, where it says this, where you are, you're kind of going in and out of regulation. You don't have super high highs and you don't have super low lows that you are kind of stuck in, but you have this like back and forth of, I'm regulated, I'm a little bit unregulated. I'm regulated, I'm unregulated. It's like a back and forth. And the goal is to be able to pull yourself back to a regulated state once you become dysregulated. So that's really the goal, not to be calm all the time and always regulated, but to be able to become dysregulated and then go back to a place of regulation. With ease is the goal. Not always easy, but that's the goal. So that's what we kind of want to help our children do. We want to try and avoid these big highs and lows and try and help them return to baseline a little easier.
So Beth, I have a question.
Yep.
This is a question I have. So in looking at this and trying to understand it, how can we teach our children, or what resources can we use to teach our children nervous system regulation? And I'm guessing we have to also do that ourselves before we can teach it to our children.
Yes. So nervous systems link up. Okay. So your family has a nervous system, like all your nervous systems are connecting and communicating with one another. And so as the adult, as the parent, you want to be the balancer. You want to be the one who you want to be regulated, and you want your nervous system to have this more gentle undulation so that you can help keep your children in that same gentle, that same gentle flow. They will match up, they link up. So if you are really dysregulated and have lots of highs and lows, then your child's nervous system is going to link up with that and follow along with the pattern of your highs and lows. They need to link into, this more gentle up and down regulated nervous system in order to learn how to do it themselves. They're not born with any regulation. That's why babies just cry and scream all the time when they want something. They have no ability to regulate themselves. They have to learn it from us. And so we need to really care for ourselves as the adults and really get the help that we need to process through any traumas that we've had or any other stressors in our lives, and have support from our community and from our own therapy and self-care, so that we can be that calmer, what would you say, that smaller waves and the child can link into that. That's why it never helps if you've ever tried, like, it doesn't normally calm a child to scream at them when they're screaming. What does that do? It just escalates. It just continues to escalate everybody. The more they scream, the more escalated you get, and the more escalated you get, the more escalated they get. But what we've know is that when we calm our nervous systems, it helps the child bring their nervous system into alignment with ours faster. So, if we can be that calm, steady force for them, it's going to alleviate the big ups and downs that we're seeing in their behavior and in their emotions.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yeah. So a little bit more just about trying to understand all these responses, because it's overwhelming. But in my work with children in foster care and kinship families and adoptive families, I learned pretty quickly that the behaviors can look really unusual, confusing. It's like, well, I would hear from parents, foster parents and adoptive parents, well, they're safe now. They're safe here. I love them. I take good care of them. We do everything. I'm doing everything I can for them. I just want to love them. I'm doing everything to try and help this child. And they keep pushing me away. They keep getting into trouble. They keep lying to me. They keep acting out, whatever the problem behavior is. And what I would try and help them understand is that a child who has experienced trauma and is used to a lot of chaos and a lot of dysfunction becomes familiar with that chaos and that dysfunction. And when they're around calm and loving people, that can feel very scary for them. And that doesn't make sense to us, because we're like, well, you're safe. But if you don't feel safe, it doesn't matter if you are safe. We can tell them all day long that they're safe, but if they don't feel safe in their body, they are going to act sort of out of control, either with the four trauma responses. So what's familiar becomes safe. And so they try to recreate that. I'm sorry, I'm looking at the chat. They asked how to regulate staying calm, but how, breathing, and what other ways? Right. Yeah. So some ways to regulate. Yeah. I mean, there's lots of different ways that we can regulate our nervous system. And I'll come back to that, because I think I'll be sharing some in the later slides about what we can do to regulate our nervous systems. But yes, breathing, yoga, cold water, splashing cold water on your face, or taking a cold shower. There's lots of different things that we can do. You just have to find what works best for you. Sorry, whoops, I need to go back. So even if it's unsafe, even if it's scary, what's familiar becomes comfortable for children. So if they were in a very chaotic home or school life, and then they're put into a safe situation, don't expect their behavior to change. That safe environment feels foreign, feels scary. And anything that's different sets off our nervous system as an alarm to say, uh-oh, this is different. Something might happen. So, just because a child is safe doesn't mean they feel safe. And then, there's the fear of rejection. So if they've been rejected or abandoned by somebody important in their life, they're not going to want to get close to people. So their behavior keeps people at a distance. You have a child who's acting out, getting into fights all the time, lying to you. What is the result of that behavior? The result is they don't have a close relationship with you, most likely. Most likely they are probably getting rejected. So it's they kind of create what they're afraid of. It's like, well, this person's going to reject me anyway, so I'm going to make them do it. I'm going to be the one that makes them do it, so to prevent that, so they can blame themselves instead of, feeling like there's just something terribly wrong with them. Also, if you're in trouble all the time, it's a great distraction from your pain, your emotional pain or discomfort. So if you're constantly in the principal's office, if you're constantly, being reprimanded or getting into trouble, you don't have a whole lot of time to really focus on your emotions and feel the fear and the sadness that's underneath all of that. And then children who've experienced trauma have valid rage. So if you've experienced abuse or neglect or abandonment or rejection or bullying, or you've witnessed abuse or any of those awful things that were on the first couple of slides that I shared with you, you have valid rage in your body that needs to be released. So you're going to see a lot of strong emotions coming out. And the only way to do that is to release it with a safe and trusted adult. So when a child starts to feel that they can trust you and they feel safe with you, that's when you might actually see the rage come out. So it's not a sign that they don't love you or don't want to be close to you necessarily. It could be that they're starting to feel that they can trust you to let a little bit of that valid rage out because they feel that you're safe enough to receive it. My daughter just got home from gymnastics and I'm the only one here tonight. So she is going to come up and grab her iPad so that she can finish this. It's real mom life stuff right now. But so you might hear her if she comes in. It's okay. You can just come upstairs, hon. Yeah, you don't need the key. Sorry. Okay, so now we'll move on. So now we get to part 3, which is about how do we cope with these things? How do we find hope and how do we cope? And hi, honey. You can just grab your stuff and there's a snack there too. You're welcome. So one thing we can do is try to identify these triggers. And we talked about the triggers earlier, them being unconscious and being subconscious at times and not knowing what they are, especially as the adult, because you're not the one who lived through whatever experience the child had. So what we can do is create this map. It's simple. You can draw it on a piece of paper. And since we live in an area that has 4 seasons, it kind of makes it really simple. So what I encourage people to do is look at the 4 seasons of the year, draw them on a piece of paper like this, and think about when, some of these events may have happened. If it was in fall, then there may be triggers in the environment that are setting the child off more at this time of year. So they may, so maybe Halloween is a trigger because they're seeing, people dressed up in scary costumes with maybe blood on them and things that remind them of events that they may have witnessed. Maybe it's the smell of like fire, like a fire pit or something. Maybe they smell something in their environment that tricks them off to something terrible that happened. So we want to try and look at the seasons and the holidays that surround them because there's a lot of sensory information coming in during those times. And so if you had someone who experienced a traumatic event in the fall, you want to be thinking about, what in that child's environment that time of year might be setting them off. And that way you can predict ahead of time. You can avoid some things that might be triggering. You can prepare ahead of time by making sure they're enrolled in therapy in the summer so that they're, working up to the fall, is going to be tough. You can also set expectations for yourself and the child. So know that this is going to be a tough time of year for your family. Know that this is going to be a time where you're going to have to, maybe cut some people some slack, maybe let some things go, not have such high expectations. Maybe their grades aren't going to be great this time of year. Maybe you need to cut back on activities. Maybe you need to cut back on sports, like whatever it might be to try and bring the nervous system into a state of calm regulation might need to be done. So you can kind of prepare when you know what time of year and what things might have happened. And then, of course, you can avoid some things as well. So maybe scary movies, you're not going to be watching a lot of scary, triggering movies during that time of year. They may be able to tolerate it in the winter if they don't have a traumatic experience that time of year. So I hope that makes that makes sense. And this is an activity you can do for yourself as well. So you can go through the year and think to yourself, what are my hard times a year, and what are things that are taking place during that time of year that might set me off? So for me, it is the fall. It's really the end of summer going into fall, which is the time of year that my mom died. So I always have a tough time of year. Over Labor Day weekend, it's always tough for me. And so I will warn my husband every year. I actually put it in his calendar to remind him that Labor Day weekend, don't expect much from me. I'm going to be a mess. So that's just, there's things that you can do. And maybe I get a massage that weekend. Maybe maybe I spend some time alone journaling that weekend. Maybe I, go get together with my girlfriends, put in some supports for myself, and make sure I have therapy that time of year as well. So some other things that help us cope and help us find hope is increasing trust in our relationships. So what's been broken by these events that take place in childhood is the child's sense of trust and their ability to feel safe and secure. And we know that when we feel as though we can trust the people around us, it calms our nervous system. It replaces the negative belief patterns about people and events in our lives, and it literally changes the neural pathways in our brain. So it's a long word, there's the phrase corrective emotional experiences. And basically what that means is that if as a child or a young adult, you experienced someone who harmed you in some way, or if you experienced some relational trauma, when you are in a relationship with someone that you can trust, and you have that positive experience with the person where they do the opposite of what you're expecting them to do. So easy example is, maybe in high school, your boyfriend cheated on you. And then from then on, you think all men are dogs and they're all going to cheat on you. And it could be women as well. And, but then you meet a really nice, honest, trustworthy person. And at first you don't trust them, right? You kind of you're not putting all your eggs in that basket again. You're not going down that path. You're not going to trust this person. But over time and through experiences, they prove to you over and over and over again that they're trustworthy. It may take many repetitions of that, but that's a corrective emotional experience. When you've had a negative one, you've had something terrible happen in a relationship, and then someone else comes along and it provides that corrective emotional experience for you, it changes your belief patterns. It changes the way your brain looks at things, and you no longer mistrust that person. You no longer expect them to hurt you in some way. And how do we build that trust? What do we do? If a trust has been broken, and you are that trustworthy person, but the child doesn't believe that you are, what can you do? And so we're going to walk through a couple of steps you can take. The first one is really may seem obvious, but sometimes isn't. But it's really just being in the presence of the child and being a witness to their pain, and being an observer, a witness, someone who can sit with them through it. And I just love this little illustration here by Tara Shannon, and I'll read it for you. It says, "I'm afraid," said Rabbit. "What are you afraid of?" asked Bear. "I don't know," replied Rabbit. "I just am." "Then I will sit with you until you're not afraid anymore," said Bear. "We will face it together." And that's really what all of us want, right? That's really what any person on the planet wants, is just someone to sit with them through it. They don't have to fix it. They don't have to take it away. Just want people to see us and feel us and hear us and know that they'll stick by us no matter what. And there's so much power in that. There really is. So don't underestimate the power you have to make a huge impact and a huge difference in somebody's life, just by being willing to sit with them through it and not try and distract them or fix it or solve the problem. Some other things we can do for creating this trust, and this is specifically for teens, in case there's anybody listening that has teens. But we want to try and keep some of that information very private. Any information that is shared, that is private for the child, can be very, what would you say, a breach in trust, right? So if they overhear you telling, your partner or your friend or a family member or somebody else, something private about them, that's a really big breach of trust, especially for teens, but really for any child of any age. And then, it can also be helpful to lead with trust. So trust the child first. They may not show you that they're trustworthy until you trust them first. So give them something to show so that they can practice being trustworthy. So, ask them for help with something, ask them to do something that you wouldn't normally ask them to do, and see if they can, and trust them that they will be able to do it. And that can be a way to start building trust between you, because the teen or child will be like, oh, they're trusting me to do this, that builds a bond and some trust and attachment between the two of you. Staying strict, not strict, but keeping your word, enforcing your rules. If you say something, follow through with it. That's a common one that we see. We have these wishy-washy boundaries and wishy-washy rules, and that can really create a lot of mistrust, because what happens is, if you set a rule and you say, if you don't do X, then Y is going to happen, and then they do X and then Y doesn't happen, well, then they know they can't trust you because you didn't keep your word. So it's important to enforce rules and not be too wishy-washy with them. At the same time, you want to choose your battles wisely with teens, and be willing to compromise when you can. So don't make a rule just to make a rule, or don't keep a rule just because your parents did that to you. But think about it, based off of the responsibility of this child, based off their maturity, based off of what they're able to handle, can I bend my rules here? Do I need to make a rule right now? Do I need to make a boundary? But if you make one, keep it. That's the biggest part. Be patient. Again, these corrective emotional experiences take time, and it have to happen many, many times over and over again in order for change to take place. So just like the person who was cheated on, and then, they break up with that person and get in the next relationship, it's going to take time for that wound to heal, and for them to trust again. And it's the same way with our children. And then an activity you can do with any child who's old enough to read and write is create like a secret question box. And what this is a box. It could be a shoebox or something fancier. You could decorate it together if the child is willing, or they could decorate it themselves, or it could just be plain. But what you do is you create the secret question box, and basically the invitation is there for them at any time to write a question or make a comment and put it in this box. And you promise that you'll read it when, once a week or every 3 days. You'll look in there and see if there's anything in there, and then you'll respond to the question or the comment in the box, and anything is allowed to be said. So nothing is off limits. There's no language that can't be used. There's no stories that can't be told. It's like a free space to just say whatever needs to be said, without the threat of rejection, without the threat of abandonment, because you're not face to face. For teens, being face to face can feel very confrontational and can feel intimidating. So it's always important to try and it's always helpful, at least, to try and talk with teens either side by side, where you're not literally face to face, but like maybe next to each other in the car, or on a walk, or while riding bikes, something you're doing side by side, as opposed to, straight across the table from each other. That can really facilitate conversations and help them open up and share with you. Another time to try and talk with children and teens is before bedtime. So a lot of times adults, we think, oh, you're just stalling at bedtime, you don't want to go to bed. And so you're bringing up all this stuff now because you're trying to, stay awake later than you should. And that could be the case, but it could also be the case that this is the time that they feel the most vulnerable and the most defenseless. And so this is the time of day that you'll see a lot of conversations and thoughts and fears start to come up. So if you have a child, when you have difficulty getting them to talk or share with you during the day, try before bedtime, because their defenses are usually lower, and they're feeling vulnerable at night, and more willing to talk and chat. Okay. So some things about calming the nervous system, which was asked earlier. What we can do is we want to focus on calming ourselves first, and some things we can do. Some things we can do. I just want to keep a check on the time. Okay, I've got about 20 minutes left. Some things we can do is calm ourselves first. So maybe that's stepping away. If you're feeling overwhelmed, if you're feeling like you're, on a scale of 1 to 10, if you're starting to feel like you're at a 6 or a 7, step away from the situation for a minute, get some distance, go in the bathroom, splash some cold water on your face, go in your room, take some deep breaths, maybe put some calming music on your headphones or something to just kind of break the tension at the moment, and then come back to it later. Because if you're escalated and the child is escalated, none of that information is, there's no lessons being taught in that situation. So it's best to just step away if you can, as long as the child is safe, and try and calm yourself first before re-engaging. This might just give you enough time to prevent yourself from saying or doing something that just will make the situation worse, because you end up feeling guilty about it later on. We can offer children a soothing spot or a calm corner. I don't like when people call them calm down corners, because that's the first thing that sets me off. If somebody says calm down, don't tell me to calm down. I don't like calling them calm down corners, but I like soothing spot. I think somebody else told me something really cute. Well, I can't think of it, but basically it's an area in your home or at school where you have a lot of sensory engaging stuff, things that can calm children down. Whether it be like a box full of fidgets, or maybe it's some paper and some markers so that they can color. Maybe it's balloons so they can blow up some balloons, doing deep breathing with the balloons. It can be all different types of stuff. There's lots of ideas online, so you can search for those and just look up ideas for calm corner, ideas for helping children calm down, and you'll find all kinds of stuff. The balloon breathing activity is great. I actually did this with my daughter last week, and it was really effective, and she's 6, but she was feeling nervous about something. And so we blew up all her scary feelings into a balloon, and then we took the balloon and we let the air out of the balloon outside. And I said, now all this, blow all your scary thoughts and feelings into the balloon. And now we're going to, let all those scary feelings outside into the fresh air to disappear. And, now they're out of your body. And so that was just a way to kind of shift her feelings and her perspective at the moment. Again, cold water, I'm a big proponent of taking a cold shower, especially if a child is really dysregulated or having a panic attack. A cold shower can regulate your nervous system. And butterfly hugs, or there's another name for them too. I can't think of it right now, but butterfly hugs or butterfly taps, or you crisscross your arms like this, you put your hands on opposite shoulders, and you just slowly tap back and forth while taking, slow breaths in and out. And this is called bilateral stimulation, and it calms your nervous system. So if you're feeling very upset, dysregulated, or your child is, these are some things you can do to try and help bring yourself down to a more regulated state. So what are some things that make things worse with children that have trauma? The first one is expecting them to bring it up. So if you're noticing these symptoms, you can't wait for them to bring it up to you. They're not going to. Children just don't have that kind of thought process. You need to bring it up with them, and you need to do some detective work and see, try and find out. Maybe at these, maybe it's a conversation before bed, or like I said, side by side, where you say, what's been going on? I've been noticing that when, I've been noticing that every day after school, you're really upset. You seem really irritable. You're having a hard time following directions. What's hard about that for you? Or what is it that makes that time of day hard for you? And sometimes just asking those questions, you'd be surprised what kids will reveal. So go to them and say, I'm noticing this, can we identify what maybe it is that's upsetting you? Hold on one second. You gotta, I'll come back to you. Okay. Sorry. So re-traumatization or additional losses. And sometimes we unintentionally re-traumatize children, especially with the families I worked with in foster care, where they are moved from home to home to home because of behavior issues, and the trauma is never addressed. And that's when we see that sort of repeated situation taking place, where they're having behavior issues, and so they get punished by with very extreme punishment type things, whether it's isolation or whether it's being restrained or whether it's, taking away recess, and all these things. And then it's like, you're just making the situation worse because you're not addressing the root cause of the problem. And so oftentimes we end up re-traumatizing children with our behaviors with our punishments and consequences unintentionally. Secrets and lies. So being dishonest with a child, keeping secrets about their life, not being forthright and forthcoming about the changes that are coming and not preparing them ahead of time for any additional changes or losses can make the behavior worse. So we want to be preparing them and reminding them of big changes that are coming up, big transitions, life transitions, developmental transitions, moves, changes in caretakers or caregivers, changes at school. Like we want to be trying to prepare them incrementally leading up to these events so that we can help build a sense of safety, security, and trust that they can predict what's coming next and that they can rely on us to tell them and to give them a heads up about what's going to happen. When children get blindsided with big changes, that breaks down their trust and makes them feel that they can't trust the adults around them. And then shaming them for their behavior and their emotions. So, saying things like, big girls don't cry, big boys don't cry, don't cry, you're okay, it's fine. Just trying to sort of squash their feelings instead of letting them express their feelings can shame them for having the emotions. So we want to try and validate emotions instead of shaming them. And our intentions are good when we say things like, don't cry or stop crying or when we say these things, it's because it's painful to watch a child feel uncomfortable emotions. It's painful for us. And so we want to stop it as quickly as we can. And we want them to feel better. And that's coming from a good place of care and love. At the same time, we are invalidating their emotions and we tend to make things worse when we do that. So instead saying things like, it's okay to cry. I want you to cry with me. It's safe for you to let your emotions out. I will sit here with you and we'll get through this together, as opposed to trying to distract them or talk them out of it or convince them that they shouldn't be upset for whatever reason. The behaviors will settle down much faster through validation and acknowledgement of what they're experiencing instead of trying to deny it or shame it out of them. So what's proven to mitigate trauma, and this is the really exciting research that has come out since 2019 from researchers at Johns Hopkins University, is that we know we have ACEs, we have the adverse childhood experiences, but we also have PACEs or PCEs, which are positive childhood experiences. And so the researchers studied these, the factors that mitigated the impact of trauma. And what they found were that these 7 things here were able to not only be protective for trauma responses, but they also, for children who already experienced trauma, these things mitigated it. So they reduced the incidences of depression and anxiety and mental health problems. So the things that all here on this 7 list, and I won't read them all because you can see them, there's something that every single one of these involves. And what it involves is our connections to our support system, to our teachers, to our coaches, to our family members, our friends, and our community. Our connections are what mitigate trauma. So the more healthy connections a child has with adults who are regulated and able to manage their emotions, the better the outcomes and the better the ability for children to heal from trauma. So again, just to recap, what's healing, what helps to heal trauma is these positive childhood experiences, which were on the last slide, going to therapy, building trust and safety at home and at school, increasing attachment and bonding. So having happy, fun times together really is important for children and families. We can get so bogged down in the everyday rigmarole of we have to go here and we have to do this, but stop and spend 10 minutes a day just being with your child, just sitting with them, observing them without any goals or intentions, without trying to teach them anything, without trying to direct them or reprimand them. Just sit with them for 10 minutes, sit on the floor, play a game, and just observe. And if you have to say something, just sportscast, like, oh, I see you drew a frog. Oh, I see you moved your blue piece 3 spaces. You just kind of witness and observe and play back what they've done. And that helps the child feel really heard and felt and seen, and fills up their bucket for emotional and for emotional and physical attention and attachment. So the more time we can spend doing that, the better outcomes we see for children, not only with trauma, but just across the board. And then again, that co-regulation process. So, bringing your state of calm into the child's life more often helps their nervous system link up with yours. You can do more research on this outside of this event tonight to learn more about that process. And there's actually a really great podcast I just listened to on it that I think everyone here would understand. So I'm happy to share that with you in like a follow-up email if Jeannie or one of the other members of the team wants to send that out. And what's that?
That'd be great. Thank you.
Yeah, since people seem really interested in that. And then support groups, peer support groups, and for not only the child, but yourself, and connection to extended family and community. Healthy connections, I should say. People that are positive, that are, bringing, good things into the child's life and being a support to them. Here to wrap up the night, I just want to say, share with you the evidence-based treatments that I recommend for children that have experienced trauma. So there's trust-based relational interventions, which is the acronym TBRI, is a very popular treatment form for children and families who have experienced trauma. It's based off of a lot of what I talked about tonight, that helping children feel safe, secure, and in a trusted relationship is what helps the child heal from trauma. Parent-child interaction therapy is another really effective treatment. It involves the parent and the child in therapy together, which I always recommend. Trying to send a child to therapy individually isn't really going to make a whole lot of change, because as soon as they're back in the environment that was triggering for them, all the same behaviors are going to come out. So you really need the people in the child's life involved in the therapy with them, and parent-child interaction therapy does that. It looks like a parent and child in the room with a therapist there, kind of guiding the parent through different activities, different play, different conversations, and eventually to the point where the therapist is outside of the room listening in with an earpiece and giving guidance to the parent. And then eventually, the parent is able to do it on their own. So it's kind of like a step-by-step process to gain the skills to help the child through their emotional distresses. And then there's play therapy and TheraPlay, which are also very effective. And you can really look into doing a lot of play therapy type activities at home with your child. And what that looks like is giving the child tools like a dollhouse and figurines of family members and little dolls and things like that, where they can play out these different scenarios and anything that might be traumatic. When it comes to child's play, it's always important that as long as they're safe, to not interrupt it, to not reprimand them for their type of play, because you might not understand what they're doing in their play, but that is how children process and heal from trauma, is through their play. And so the more opportunities they have to play it out and to get into it into a role play, or like an exchange with toys of some kind, that is extremely healing for them. And so as long as they're safe and they're not a danger to themselves or others, let their play be what it is and try not to intervene. So those are my recommendations there. And then the takeaway for tonight is to observe behavior through your trauma lens with curiosity instead of conviction. So instead of blaming children for their behavior, try and get curious about their behavior, and get curious about your own behavior. To the question that was posed earlier about, how do we know if we have unprocessed trauma? It's being curious. It's looking at, what sets me off now in the present, and when did I feel that way in the past? And when you ask yourself that question, you'd be surprised at the connections you can make. So I encourage you to just be curious, and instead of thinking that, we know exactly what's going on with our children. And now we come to the question and answer. So, and I love this quote here. It says, when working with young people, there are times when you will see results in 10 seconds, and there are times you won't see it for 10 years. Either way, keep planting those seeds of character. Eventually they bloom. So that's, just a little encouragement for you that you might not always see the outcome of the work that you're putting in today or even 5 years from now, but that eventually the fruits of your labor will pay off, and just continue to be that strong, consistent, supportive, loving person with your children. So let's see.
Great.
Yeah. So feel free, you can ask me anything before we get to the questions. Just if you want to stay in touch with me, feel free to reach out to me on social media. I'm very active on Facebook, where I have a Facebook group called Emotiminds, and I'm on LinkedIn quite a bit. Email is always available if you have specific questions. And I also have a monthly childhood trauma newsletter that I send out once a month, and that's free for anyone who wants free education and resources on childhood trauma. So with that, we'll go back to asking questions, and feel free to open it up.
Great. Thank you so much, Beth, for sharing your work and valuable insight on this heavy topic. We so appreciate it. We're going to jump right into the Q&A, and we'd like to introduce Bree Ziegler, who's here to field any questions you might have as it relates to our schools. Bree is a licensed clinical social worker and a certified school social worker. She has worked at Patton Middle School and is currently serving Unionville High School. She holds a postmaster's certificate in trauma-informed counseling and is currently working on a second master's in trauma and resilience in educational settings. In addition to her full-time job at UHS, Bree also works as a teen trauma therapist. She is nationally certified in trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy and extensively trained in eye movement desensitization reprocessing therapy, or EMDR, both evidence-based therapies for trauma. Bree has spent her career specializing in trauma, particularly in the adolescent population, and has provided professional development for the UCFSD staff on this topic. Thank you so much, Bree, for joining us.
Thank
you. I don't think we can hear you.
Oh, can you hear me now?
We can barely hear you. Okay. All right. So we're just going to jump right into the questions.
How about now?
Oh, that's much better. Thank you. I think the first one actually, Bree, is for you. Are our school counselors and staff looking through a trauma lens at school, particularly with students experiencing difficulties?
Yeah, so I can definitely speak for the social workers. There's a social worker at Patton. There's one for the elementary schools and two at the high school. And I know because I work very closely with them specifically, we've all been pretty intensively trained in trauma and all have held the CCC certificate, which is a certified clinical trauma professional, and have done continuing education classes on trauma. With regards to the school counselors, I can't speak to every single one, but I would feel pretty confident that they do all operate from a trauma-informed lens. Working in the counseling field, especially in schools, a lot of the professional development does touch upon that. And then Jeannie had mentioned too that each school also does receive trauma-informed education as well. So I can't speak to their specific training, but I would feel very confident that they are coming from a trauma-informed lens.
Okay, great. Thank you. Beth, I think this next one's for you. How does a cold shower regulate the nervous system?
That's a good question. So I'm not exactly sure the mechanisms of it, but it's a tried and true therapist specialty recommendation that I've learned over the years. That I think, it probably has something to do with the vagus nerve. If anybody knows about polyvagal theory, it's another thing that you can look into. But basically there's a long nerve that runs through our body that helps to control our sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system. And when we do certain things with our body, like Sometimes it could be like massaging in a certain area. It affects that nerve and it helps to regulate your nervous system. So the cold water probably activates the calming portion of your nervous system so that you can more easily regulate yourself. It's definitely something to try out and the next time you're feeling anxious or upset. It's not the most comfortable feeling, cold water doesn't feel great, but kind of like shocks your system and brings you right back into the present moment and kind of gets you out of all of that head, all of that head mess. So yeah, give it a try.
So interesting. Thank you.
Yeah.
Bree, I think this next one is for you. Can the school integrate nervous system regulation for our students as part of their SEL lessons or self-awareness?
Yeah, so one other thing real quick, to hop off of what Beth was saying with the cold water, I've also read that just putting your wrist under cold water can be helpful too if a cold shower feels too scary. I know that would not, I would be I'm a hot water person, so you can put your wrist in cold water and that can have a similar.
Yeah, even drinking cold water.
But in terms of incorporating mindfulness into schools and yeah, absolutely. Or ice even, that's another one. But Jeannie, can you repeat the whole question? I want to make sure I answer it all.
Sure. Can the school integrate nervous system regulation for our students as part of their SEL lessons as part of self-awareness?
Yeah, so I think that again, and I'm sorry if I sound like a broken record, I can't speak to every single building. I know that when I was at Patton Middle School, the school counselors in particular and the school social worker and school psych were starting to do lessons where they were teaching different skills like that, of teaching how to incorporate breathing. I know we've educated teachers on, how to incorporate breathing that, whether it is a brain break and doing breathing or starting the class with an activity. I have a couple of teachers at the high school that have shared that they have openers that they do some kind of regulating activity to help students kind of transition in just from the chaos of, going between classes. I think that is a phenomenal idea. I think incorporating mindfulness and emotional and physiological regulation is so important in schools. And I think if buildings aren't currently doing that, I think it's a great idea. And I do know that one of the school elementary counselors, I'm not sure which specific building she's at, is pretty extensively trained in mindfulness as well and has done some breathing exercises with the behavioral health team. And I'm pretty confident she incorporates that with her students as well. So I think it is incorporated, and I think it just is something that we can continue to really promote and encourage to keep doing.
Sure. It sounds like something that the staff would benefit from as well. I mean, they go through so much every day, I'm sure.
Yeah, there's so many different things you can do. And one of the things is making sure that, children have more opportunities to eat smaller snacks and things, because you were talking about like the physiological component and, some children, especially those who have experienced trauma, like they need to actually eat more frequently throughout the day. So maybe that's even something that schools can consider, or also making sure they have, time for more time for physical movement. Oftentimes schools will punish a child by, taking them out of recess or not allowing them to have physical movement. But when we move and when we move our body and when we are able to do whatever feels good and comfortable in the body, that also is very regulating for our nervous system. And so in schools, we tend to, make everyone sit still and don't get up from your seat, and you can't do this and you can't do that. But the more you can help the children move, the more regulated their nervous systems will be. Sitting still all day is unnatural for children, especially those with trauma, because they have all that arousal in their body and they need to burn it off. And the one way to burn it off is through physical activity.
That's great. Thank you, Beth.
You're welcome.
I think the last few questions we have are kind of all related to some of the resources or tools that you talked about earlier in your presentation regarding regulating how to stay calm, breathing exercises. And we want to be mindful of the time. So if there's any way that you could share, if either one of you, Bree or Beth, can share resources that we can shoot back to our family or have on our Focus website, that would be great. And then they can, dig into any information they need with regards to self-regulation and, the breathing and all that. Is that something that you might be able to send?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I also have a free, it's called the CARES model. It's something I developed, and it's basically a step-by-step guide for what to do when a child has been triggered. And you can find that on my website for free. And it's Beth Tyson /cares. Or
Okay.
/cares. Yeah. Cares. I'll put it in the chat. I don't know if I can, but we can also do that as a follow-up email to people. But it's a great step-by-step process to go through with children who have been triggered.
Okay. Sounds great. Thank you. And Bree, if you have anything to share as well, we'll make sure we get that information out for you.
Absolutely.
Okay, great. Thank you. So I think we're going to wrap it up here. Just want to thank you, Beth and Bree, for supporting the viewers and their questions. And thank you, Beth, for laying, I'm just going to put this up, for laying a solid foundation that as parents, we can all build on to help to understand trauma in our children, trauma in ourselves. And I think even the most basic understanding of trauma can foster compassion and empathy, which I think we can all use, especially in our society these days. So thank you for supporting that, and for all the work you do. Thank you, Bree, for the support and guidance that you give us every day. You can visit Beth's website, bethtyson.com, for a wealth of information, and subscribe to her newsletter to receive mental health tips for children and access to free resources and training on trauma-informed care. I don't think I'm forgetting anything, so we're just going to wrap it up here. Don't forget to follow Focus on Facebook, Focus for UCFSD, and Instagram and Twitter at Focus Committee. Thank you so much for joining us tonight, and be well.
Bye, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure.
Thank you.